Okay, Biology B students, here's lesson 1.1, Biodiversity and Evolution. Some of things you're going to question while you're going through this lesson. How do ecosystems change over time? How and why do populations change throughout time? How do humans and human activity affect ecosystems? How can the diversity of life be understood through evolutionary relationships? How does cycling of matter occur at all levels of biological organization? How does its flow of energy occur at all levels of biological organization? Some of the targets here, students will be able to describe how biodiversity is driven by evolutionary processes at the ecological level, summarize the human effects of nutrient cycles, water, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and describe how biodiversity is driven by evolutionary processes at the ecological level. Summarize human effects of nutrient cycles. So what is biodiversity? If you look at the image, you can see it's a lot of different things, including animals, plants, in a particular area, that type of stuff. So the term biodiversity refers to a variety of life, and it can be genetically, how many different types of genes within a population, how many different species within a population, the variety of the ecosystems. Is there deserts and wetlands and oceans and grasslands and that type of stuff, and the ecological and evolutionary processes that sustain it, right? So what are the things that are allowing the ecosystems and the biological diversity to continue? So biodiversity includes not only species we consider rare, threatened, or endangered, but everything living. Even organisms we still know little about, such as microbes, fungi, invertebrates. Our skin is considered an ecosystem because it has so many different things living on it. Biodiversity is important everywhere. Species and habitats in your area, as well as those in distant lands, all play a role in maintaining healthy ecosystems. It's very important that what's in our ecosystem stays here and that we keep it and keep all parts of it because they help keep it in balance. Why is biodiversity important? We need biodiversity to satisfy basic needs: food, drinking water. Well, if our biological diversity is intact, it helps to filter water. Fuel, shelter, medicine all come from having a biodiverse ecology. How are we ever going to evolve if people keep pushing us back in the ocean? Funny little thing. Much of the world's population still uses plants and animals as a primary source of medicine. In the United States alone, 57% of the 150 most prescribed drugs have their origins in biodiversity. So chopping down forests and things like that we have and we get some medicines from, if we keep doing that, we might not have those medicines in the future. Threats to biodiversity. Lots of different things. Over the last century, humans have come to dominate the planet. Ecosystems are being rapidly altered, and the planet is undergoing massive loss of biodiversity. Most of the schools in Hilliard were once farmland, right? No, we don't have a lot of farmland on the planet, and that land is no longer capable of producing food. So if you look at all these different types of things in the slide here, habitat destruction, that's changing a farm to a parking lot. Global warming, changes in the temperature of the planet on an average. Overall exploitation, we're killing hundreds of millions of sharks every year. Pollution, accidents, and non-native species invading areas. So here's a great example in that picture. You can see where this habitat loss and habitat destruction. Once you chop down a rainforest, it will never become a rainforest again. While the Earth has always experienced changes and extinctions, the current changes are occurring at an unprecedented rate. Still more sobering, most threats to biodiversity are caused by humans. The good news is that it is within our power to change our actions to help ensure the survival of species and natural systems, and ultimately ourselves. That's known as the Green Revolution. So the Goldilocks planet. Everything needs to be like Goldilocks, just right. Temperature has to be maintained within a certain range. Water, it has to be found in all three phases. The size of the planet, gravity holds onto the atmosphere, the resilient and adaptive nature of our planet. You see, we have these leaf cutter ants. They're using those leaves as a food source, but they help protect the tree from other invaders. So a little relationship, right? Here you see beaver lodges that help create ponds. Ponds create a whole different ecosystem than a stream. Each species here today represents a long chain of evolution. Each plays a role in respective ecosystems. So in terms of the planet's been around for a long time. Initially, it was very inhospitable to any type of life. It didn't even have oxygen. Oxygen was poisonous. Organic molecules, proteins, polymers, and chemical reactions became available to form the first protocells, biological evolution. It's about 3.7 billion years from single-celled prokaryotic bacteria, which we learned about in biology A, right? Those are the cells without nucleus and organelles. Eukaryotic creatures to eukaryotic multicellular organisms, so becoming more and more diverse. The atmosphere was created. Building blocks of life were established. Things like, the macromolecules like carbohydrates, lipids, the nucleic acids, and proteins. Cell-like structures begin to exist. Bacteria emerge. We have that endosymbiotic theory where these bacteria kind of emerged and came together to form eukaryotic cells that had now specific functioning organelles. And then once that happened, multicellular organisms arose from that. So if you look at the picture, you get an idea of that process. All right, if we had 24 hours of life, right? If the entire existence of our planet was 24 hours, we wouldn't see first humans until the very last seconds on the planet, right? So you can take a look at this graphic, give you a good idea where things evolved. What are the unifying principles of evolution? Constant change. All species are continuously in a state of change. Nature, the combined influences of physical and biological limiting factors act upon the organism. Organism has to adjust. Limiting factor, any factor, physical or biological, which regulates the welfare of an organism. Disease, competition, predation, environmental change, right? If bacteria were allowed to grow unchecked, in other words, they had ideal environment, we would be swimming in them all over the planet, 3 feet deep in just a couple weeks. Changes in the structure of DNA, that would impact biodiversity. If you look here at the fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? That's a dominant trait. Why isn't it more prevalent in the human population? Because there's not many of those particular genes available in our genome. So genetic diversity to the population, right? That's what happens when we change the DNA. It adds some diversity. May or may not be adaptive, may or not be useful, may or not be healthy, may not be good or bad. It just depends on the trait. It shouldn't change, or DNA can change, and it depends on the environment. So evolution, the change in a population's genetic makeup, gene pool over time, many generations. The most selective of those survive and reproduce, the ones that are actually going to help the individual creature survive. Those will be passed on. All species descended from something before them. Then there's 2 types of evolution, small evolution and large evolution. Microevolution, small, simple little changes over a really long period of time, hardly noticeable, right? But over a long period of time, they do change the individual. It could be height. You're slowly getting taller and taller and taller and taller, but you would never notice it in one generation. And then macroevolution is a long-term, large-scale evolutionary change through which new species are formed and others are lost through extinction. Okay, so here's an example. Okay, here's how our environment changed the selection of the moth population over in Europe. If you look at the top picture, the dark moth is easily visible. Birds were eating those a lot more than the white moth in the bottom picture. As Industrial Revolution took over, a lot more soot was in the air, and it changed the trees to be a little more darker. Now, in the bottom picture, you can see which of the moths is much more visible. So which gene would no longer be as popular in the population? Well, it's the gene for the trait, the gene for the allele for the white color in that moth was shown a lot less in the gene pool because the black ones were not eaten nearly as much. There was not many white ones. So the environmental change, pollution darkened trees, naturally selected directionally toward the darker moths, biodiversity being influenced by humans in this situation, right? So the gene pool changed because of humans from selecting the white to then selecting the dark colored allele for that gene. Okay, here's the environment also playing a role, right? If you look at the fox, there's a white fox and a gray fox. Early fox population spreads northwards and some spread south. Northern population, different environmental conditions led to different selected pressures, created two different species. In the north, white adapted to cold through heavier fur, shorter legs, shorter ears, all those things so they won't give up as much heat. White fur matches the snow to help camouflage it. Down on the bottom, the southern population, the foxes became darker. Why? Because it helped it adapt to camouflage them in the darker environment. Adapted to heat throughout lightweight fur, longer legs to help release the heat a lot sooner and faster. So what do we need you to know? Macroevolution is a cumulative result of a series of microevolutionary events, typically seen in fossil record. Nobody around to see the small gene pool changes over time. Coevolution, interaction, biodiversity. Species so tightly connected that the evolutionary history of one affects the other and vice versa. The leafcutter ant and the fungus are so tightly connected, a change to one affects the other. The Panamanian leaf-cutting ant farms fungus on leaf fragments for food. Minor workers tend the fungus garden and nurse the brood. So these things are evolving together. They're important to each other. Okay, that ends lesson 1.1.